A modest fisherman named Rami lived in a far-off realm where golden dunes and the boundless sea met. Known to his fellow villagers for his constant patience and kindness, he was a man of modest resources but a rich spirit. Rami would go out of his simple straw-roofed cottage every morning, long before the first rays of dawn tinged the sky in shades of pink and amber, gathered his fishing equipment, and headed for the shore. As he pulled his boat into the sea, it rocked softly, its creaking sound drowned off by the whispering air. His boat was a small but solid vessel made of ancient cedar wood. The expanse of the water, which held secrets only time could reveal, served as both his companion and his source of sustenance. He whispered a silent prayer as he threw his net into the glistening depths, hoping for a plentiful catch that would bring in enough money to keep him going for another day. On certain days, he was showered with baskets of silver-scaled fish, but on other days, all he had was the vast horizon of the sky and the rolling waves. Rami felt an odd weight in his net one fateful morning as the sun's golden fingers extended across the lake. Expecting to see the typical gleam of fish caught in its weave, he hauled it up with steady hands. Instead, his eyes widened in shock. One thing, shining with an unearthly light, lay twisted in the ropes. It wasn't just any ring, though. It was made of gold so pure that it appeared to contain the very essence of the sun. The light danced across its flawless surface as Rami held it up. He ran his fingertips over its fine engraving, an inscription in a script he did not know. Despite being alien, the symbols exuded mystique, as though they were whispering secrets from a bygone era. He was intrigued by his discovery, but he was unsure of how to interpret it. He exhaled, questions racing through his head as he carefully slipped the ring into the leather pouch fastened at his waist. He had no idea how drastically his life would change as a result of this little symbol of fate. There was just an indescribable sadness that hung over the Sultan's court, like an unshakable shadow in the center of the magnificent castle, where marble hallways glistened under the light of golden chandeliers and silk-draped windows gazed out over expansive gardens. Once alive with the sound of flutes and courtier laughter, the air was now hauntingly quiet. Because their beloved princess, the light of the realm, lay on her silken bed and was getting farther away every day, servants walked about in quiet tones, their faces weighted with anxiety. The Sultan's favorite princess, Princess Layla, was considered the epitome of elegance and beauty. Her eyes glistened like the stars that decorated the desert sky. Her laughter was like the tinkling of silver bells, and her generosity had warmed the hearts of everyone who knew her. She was only a shadow of herself now, though. Her golden curls were lifeless on her pillows. Her once bright face had gone pallid, and the warmth that had once infused her voice had disappeared, leaving nothing but quiet. The greatest sages had been consulted, the finest doctors in the country had been called in, and the rarest herbs had been turned into elixirs, but to no avail. The kingdom's optimism perished along with the princess. The Sultan, a powerful man who was powerless to stop his daughter's suffering, stood before his people in desperation and said, his voice quivering under the weight of grief, "Let the world know that whomever can get my daughter healthy again will get half of my kingdom. Additionally, he will take her hand in marriage if he so chooses." The announcement spread like wildfire, blown by the wind across towns and villages, reaching the ears of visitors in far-off places, merchants in busy bazaars, and even the lowest of men who worked by the sea. The fisherman Rami was one among them. The palace's affairs seemed as far away to him as the stars. His heart had always belonged to the water and the straightforward rhythm of the tides. He had never dreamed of wealth or power. He paid little attention when he learned of the Sultan's fervent request. How could a simple fisherman help a princess who was dying? He had no business seeking miracles. But as the salty wind brushed his cheeks as he sat outside his little hut that night, he found himself turning the golden ring between his fingers without realizing it. It was softly glowing from the moonlight, and then an odd thing happened. As though the metal itself had sprung to life, a warmth emanated from the ring and seeped into his palm. Then, like an echo from another realm, a voice spoke from within, quiet but commanding. "Take me to the palace, and all shall be revealed." Rami's throat tightened each breath. His heartbeat accelerated. He stared at the ring in shock as he flipped it over. Was it his imagination? He looked about, half expecting to be tricked, but he was alone with the night and the distant murmur of the water. He felt an odd tug in his chest, an inexplicable need he could not resist. He had a gut feeling that this was no typical ring. There was a reason it was in his possession. He got up at the crack of dawn, cleaned the salt off his skin, and put on his cleanest clothes, which were plain but tidy. He inhaled deeply before heading toward the opulent palace, uncertain of what was ahead, but convinced that his life was about to undergo a permanent transformation. As Rami got closer to the magnificent gates, the palace's imposing walls, with their golden inlays glistening in the morning light, loomed before him. Shining armored guards stood at attention, their curved sword hilts resting on their hands. When Rami moved forward, they looked suspiciously at his plain clothing. One of them crossed his spear in front of the entryway and said, "Halt! State your business." After a brief pause, Rami extracted the golden ring from the leather pouch at his waist. The guards' faces shifted as soon as the light touched its glossy exterior. Their cheeks became white as though they had seen a ghost, and their severe eyes flitted with surprise. After taking a nervous step back, one of them looked at his friend. With a tone of concern, the second guard murmured, "Where did you get this?" Rami gave an honest response, saying, "I found it at sea," but he felt there was more to this ring than just luck. The guards, their tight posture now infused with a nervous energy, hustled him inside without another word. They took him through the palace's enormous marble halls, past tall columns that were carved with detailed images of former kings, and along hallways where silk curtains fluttered in the warm air. As he went by, noblemen and servants turned their heads and whispered to one another. The Sultan's private chamber doors finally opened, exposing a large room adorned with golden lights that softly illuminated the silk-draped canopy of an elaborate bed. The Sultan himself sat in the middle of it, his once proud shoulders weighed down with sorrow, his royal robes embroidered with silver threads. He raised his tired, soulful eyes to Rami. His breath caught when he noticed the ring in Rami's hand. His knuckles whitened as his fists tightened over the armrests of his throne. His voice was hardly audible above a whisper, but it was full with emotion as he said, Where did you find this?" Rami took a step forward and told his story, including the voice that had led him here, the peculiar tug of fate, and the morning at sea. The Sultan closed his eyes and let out a deep breath as he spoke, perhaps taking in the meaning of what he had said. "This ring belonged to my daughter," the Sultan finally whispered, his fingers shaking as he reached for it. With a mixture of sadness and hope, he raised his eyes to Rami. "It was taken from her rooms many months ago. This is no typical ring. It has been a treasured relic passed down through the centuries in my family and is believed to bring many blessings. It is thought to keep its bearers safe and prevent bad luck." He hesitated, longing in his voice. Perhaps it has the remedy she sorely needs. He ordered the royal attendants to rush to the princess's bedside, where Layla lay with pale skin like winter flower petals and faint breathing. "My child, hold on," the Sultan said as he knelt next to her, his palm grazing her forehead. A servant respectfully removed the ring from Rami's hand and placed it on Princess Layla's fragile finger. It had an instant impact. Like the warmth of the rising sun, a gentle golden glow flowed from the ring. As the princess was surrounded by the light, which glistened like waves under the moon, silence descended over the room. Then as color returned to Layla's cheeks, she gasped and her chest rose. She looked up, her lifeless, dreary eyes gleaming with fresh energy. She put a palm over her heart and sat up suddenly. "Father!" she cried, her voice lively now, rather than feeble. "I feel as though a heavy burden has been removed from me. I feel as light as air." After a brief period of silence, the room burst into cheers. The Sultan, filled with emotion, let tears fall freely down his cheeks, while servants sobbed and nobility applauded with clapping hands. With a smile of unfathomable thanks, he turned to face Rami. "You have carried out my command," he declared, his voice trembling with emotion. "You have saved my daughter's life by returning this ring to her." His eyes gleamed as he inhaled deeply and stood up. "Half of my realm is yours, as promised. You can also accept her hand in marriage if you so choose." All eyes moved to Rami. The modest fisherman who had entered the palace as a complete stranger, but now appeared before the Sultan as a man of destiny, and the chamber became silent. Still dressed modestly, Rami knelt before the Sultan, his head lowered in profound respect. The fact that he was a simple man of the sea remained unchanged despite the palace's magnificence, the gravity of the situation, and the attention of courtiers and noblemen. With a firm yet modest voice, he said, "Your Majesty, I am but a fisherman, a man who has spent his days with the wind and the waves. I have never pursued wealth or envisioned myself as a landowner. My greatest treasure has always been simplicity, and the sea has always been my home." He hesitated, his eyes darting to Princess Layla, who was once again in front of him, glowing and alive. "However, if the princess requests it, I will accept her hand in marriage, not for the kingdom or power, but with all of my heart's devotion." Everyone in the room turned to look at Layla, and silence descended. Up until now, the princess had kept quiet while observing Rami with sharp eyes that glistened with silent comprehension. As she walked closer, her silken gown trailing behind her like the whisper of dawn, a genuine and pleasant smile curled her lips. Her voice reverberated across the hallway as she declared, "A man of honor and kindness is worth more than 1,000 kings. Your heart shines brighter than any crown, even though you haven't asked for riches or glory." She looked him in the eye with a gentle but steady face. "I would be honored to be your wife, Rami, if you accept me." The palace was filled with a ripple of happiness. Once doubtful of a fisherman's position in the royal court, the courtiers muttered in amazement. With a full heart, the Sultan moved forward and touched Rami's shoulder. He said, "Then so it shall be." Not all noble hearts are destined for thrones, and not all rulers are born. Today, fate and love have made wise decisions. Thus, Rami and Princess Layla's marriage was blessed under the golden domes of the palace, amid the scent of jasmine and the sounds of festivities. Even though he was now a prince, Rami refused to let wealth or titles alter who he was. He frequently slipped away from the palace's opulence and headed toward the shore during the still hours before morning. He would cast his net there, like he used to do, and listen to the quiet of the waves as they whispered secrets that only the sea knew. He would take his ancient wooden boat into the waters. He recognized that true riches was not found in gold, or that a man's value was determined by his level of authority, something that many others never did. His journey from the great waters to the heart of a princess had been sculpted by love, humility, and the enigmatic ways of fate. As evidence that sometimes the most unlikely people are picked to create the most amazing stories, their story endured and was passed down through the years.